It's Friday, April 29th. This is Real Talk. Ryan Jesperson here with you. John Hicks in just a moment. Supriya Dwivedi. And in about a half hour's time, one of the candidates for the leadership of Canada's Conservative Party, that is Jean Charest, will be joining us live on this Friday morning. Whenever you're catching it live, whether you're catching it later, we appreciate you being here. We're going to get to some newsworthy stuff with Supriya, who's been keeping an eye on a couple of stories. But, of course, she's also one of those national commentators. You read her stuff in papers like the Globe and Mail, and you read her columns nationally. And she's got one out just yesterday talking about Elon Musk and Twitter. And Johnny, I know that you feel like you've had enough talk of Elon Musk and Twitter this week, and nobody could blame you. And I think you speak for many people.
I'm fine now. I was a little grumpy the other day.
No, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I think a lot of people are like ready to just sort of like move on from that conversation. Maybe they get a little bit annoyed about that conversation. But the fact of the matter is, it's a big story with big implications.
We got to talk about it.
And Supriya's been writing about it, and in particular around the freedom of speech angle. So that'll be coming up in just a little bit. Plus some developments on testing or approvals for vaccines for young kids. And I know that that's going to mean a lot to a lot of young parents. This is kind of your last call. If you're listening to us live streaming on Mixlr Audio, or if you're watching us live on YouTube, you do still have time to submit a question. For Jean Charest, we're going to be putting your questions in front of him. Want to give you an opportunity to ask pointed, direct, specific questions. We won't get too far down rabbit holes, but questions can be specific. For example, his team just rolled out his environment plan that he says will make Canada an energy superpower. It'll export clean, ethical Canadian energy to the world. That word ethical has been used in energy conversations in Canada for the last, 20 years or so. Will it resonate? Especially, will it resonate with voters in a general election? Will it maintain a conservative climate plan, maintain credibility, while at the same time eliminating a consumer price on carbon? That's the question a lot of people have after viewing the early draft from Jean Charest just this week about what a conservative climate plan would look like under his leadership. So we'll get into that with the leadership hopeful Jean Charest coming up later in the show today. Plus, of course, trash talk and your comments live as you watch this. Yes. That through, of course, the Real Talk RJ hashtag. What are you amped up about? Was that a trash talk?
I just love trash talk. I love Fridays. It's
a nice way to just blow off a little steam and head into the weekend with a smile on our face.
Get it out.
And if Lindsay is tuned in right now, you're up, Lindsay. Lindsay's in the bullpen right now, just warming up. We've got a great email locked and loaded there. This show is presented by our friends at Bitcoin Well. If you have questions about Bitcoin, you're seeing it mentioned a lot in the news. It's coming up more frequently. Like our roundtable a couple of weeks ago, we're talking about the blockchain and Bitcoin and how does it fit into the economic future of jurisdictions, cities, provinces, a nation. It's become part of the political conversation. If you have a question about Bitcoin, you want to ask it to a real human that you can trust, I recommend Benny. You can find Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
I'll ask Supriya and Jean both this morning about this convoy rolling into Ottawa this weekend. They're expecting between 500 and 1,000 motorcycles. It's called the Rolling Thunder
Are they on
convoy.
Tour now?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and everybody's kind of wondering now, is it a protest convoy? And if so, what exactly are they protesting? What's the purpose behind it? I was reading some interviews yesterday where one of the organizers said they're focused on holding a service, and I'm not going to scoff at this. They say they're focused on holding a service at the National War Memorial, which they say was desecrated by police during the Freedom Convoy protests in February. That's when police put barricades around the memorial. Remember this? Because people were dancing on the, people were getting pretty upset, especially with the disrespect around the tomb of the unknown soldier. Mm-hmm. You see Ottawa police just the other day, they say that they've identified the woman that was dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier. They're going to lay charges there. Yeah. And then protesters later tore that fencing down. Some of them appeared to be veterans, and so these organizers say in a video that they posted on Wednesday of this week that this weekend coming up, they'll allow those veterans who were removed from the memorial to give back dignity to the site and to lay a wreath. So we'll see. If it's a chill, respectful ceremony,
I'm all for it.
People have the right to do it.
Seems like you're trying to correct a mistake.
But you wouldn't blame the good folks of Ottawa, especially those that are living downtown, for maybe cringing or bracing themselves a little bit, wondering what this might look like.
How much have they been through? Like, come on.
Is it a little? It's a little bit different if these demonstrators, these occupiers. I don't know if they're occupiers yet. You can't really say that. But if they're on motorcycles, it's a little bit different than when they're rolling in big rigs and RVs with hot tubs strapped to the back, right?
I mean, you live downtown. I used to, when I first moved to Edmonton, I lived downtown. It's like downtown anywhere is noisy enough.
Yeah.
Let alone with big rigs lined up honking and.
I wouldn't blame folks in Ottawa for this. It's a good weekend to get out to the cottage.
Yeah, take the weekend.
Good weekend
off.
to get out of town and just hope you can get back into town on Sunday evening. Pop culture news, pretty interesting stuff as well.
I'm into this.
The late TV scene is going to look a little bit different. The kind of this guy that's been he infused his way into the pop culture. What do you want to call it? The what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, he fused himself into the fabric.
Yeah.
With I think his carpool karaoke. Is that what James Corden what really skyrocketed him to success?
Of course, and I didn't know nothing about him, and then all of a sudden he was everywhere a few years ago, and I was like, I think he just connects with people. He's an average guy, you know what I mean, and people like him. But yeah, he's calling it quits. Yes, well, he's not calling it quits. You detail. Well,
no, I mean he's gone next year basically, and an emotional goodbye. It seemed to his audience. He says he's going to be gone by 2023.
Wanted to go on for 3 more years. Lawyers couldn't get it, so obviously the network doesn't want him there, which is, I don't know, it just seems strange for me. I mean, his ratings are good, but
I always think it's interesting when the details get out.
Yeah.
Right? He wanted 1 year, they wanted 3 years, and then you don't know if that's accurate or true or not, what the money was looking like. He did all right, I would imagine.
$70 million he's worth right now, so he's not retiring, you know.
I'd retire on 70.
He's good.
What would be your minimum for retiring at this stage in your life? Yeah, what could you make it on? What would be your bare minimum that you'd go, I'm not going to work another day?
Come on, I'm not greedy. You give me a cool mill, and I'll buy a little patch of land in Beaumont or wherever.
Can you retire on a mill?
I'll make it work.
Yeah.
Get a couple baby cows and a chicken coop and call her quits.
See. So, but that sounds to me then you still got a lot of work. You'd have to be going off the grid. You'd be like, probably you'd dig your own well.
You'd
have the big solar setup.
Solar farm.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Johnny, if you were going to build that, where could you go to get a free quote?
Well, I might go to Kubi Energy.
Yeah, is that right? Would you maybe go there? Why don't we do it? Let's do it. It just felt like a perfect inroad. To remind you, because Supriya's coming right up. We're going to talk to her. Let's just fit this in here. Solar energy solutions to power your life. I think I'd need a minimum of like 3 to retire. Maybe 2. 5 would be nice. 10 would be great.
10 would be perfect.
For that very niche customer that just won the lottery and is looking to build their solar setup and get totally off the grid, may we recommend our good friends at Kubi Energy. They're providing solar energy solutions to power your life, and they're doing it in applications you might not have even thought of. I recommend you follow them on Instagram. Some really cool examples of how more and more people are going green with Kubi Energy. Now, once you've trusted your project to them and it's all set up and you're realizing what this new game looks like, your power bills are down, you're going to be able to sell back to the grid. You're going to want to find a structure or an arrangement that's right for you. And that's where Park Power comes into the mix. Our friends at Park Power partner with Kubi Energy on a solar rebate, a buyback that is way higher with regards to what's going to go back into your pocket. 25 cents versus 6. Put it that way, with the big guys, makes way more sense to go with Park Power. If you're one of those that have solar panels set up, you're going to want to talk to them, get more details on that rebate at parkpower.ca. And a quick shout out to our friends at Infinity Healthcare. They know, because they talk to families every single day, that more and more Canadians are in a tough situation. They're doing everything they can to provide for their kids, and their parents need their support as well. This sandwich generation is looking for caregivers and a caregiving scenario that'll allow their parents to age in place with the supports they need at a level they're comfortable with. This can include getting rid of things like language barriers, maybe some religious or cultural sensitivities. The team at Infinity Healthcare uses a personality matching structure to make sure that both sides are excited about the personal relationship before that actual caregiving happens. It's what sets them apart from other healthcare organizations. You can find Infinity under the sponsors tab on our website, ryanjesperson.com. Well, every Friday right around this time, it's our absolute pleasure to check in with our very good friend, Supriya Dwivedi. You know Supriya. She's the Director of Policy and Engagement at the Center for Media, Technology, and Democracy at McGill University and a member of our Real Talk editorial board. It's good to see you, my friend.
Good morning.
Are you taking a look at this? It's hard to ignore the story of this Rolling Thunder convoy that's heading into Ottawa this weekend. They're estimating about 500 motorcycles. They're estimating a lot of them, or at least a significant number of them, are going to be Canadian veterans that are keen on placing a wreath at the National War Memorial. It sounds like they kind of want to make things right after it got a little messy a couple of months ago with the Freedom Convoy. Are you feeling trepidatious about this? Is your heart in your throat a little bit about this based on the previous Ottawa occupation? How are you processing it?
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to, right? Given just everything that happened with the Freedom Convoy. And there does seem to be at least a little bit of overlap in terms of some of the organizers or some of the folks that are involved with this weekend's protest. So I can certainly appreciate the fact that if you're on the ground in Ottawa, like you live in the downtown or the downtown adjacent areas, you kind of have a little bit of like PTSD over this, right? You don't want to be subject to the same noise or some of the same disruptions that the Freedom Convoy subjected Ottawa to. And it'll be, interesting to see how differently the Ottawa police and the security forces on the ground deal with this protest. As opposed to the previous protest. But I think there was already an arrest made for some of this already getting a little bit out of hand.
Yeah, and you sort of wonder if there's going to be a certain element to this group that are showing up feeling like there was unfinished business as opposed to making things right. And so, yeah, like you said, if you're the Ottawa police right now, you don't want to be a case study twice within 2 months. Yeah. So I'll be interested to see how they manage this. They've got to sort of gently find that balance, right, of people's right to movement and assembly and speech, while at the same time not, I think, repeating some of the same mistakes that they were so heavily criticized for that the chief essentially paid for with his job the first time around.
Yeah. And I think what you just touched on there is key. You need to strike the right balance. People don't necessarily have the right to disrupt people's lives, but of course they have the right to protest and to peacefully assemble and to, make their views known. That ends, however, when you're incredibly disruptive and you're impeding on people's, day-to-day lives.
Probably the biggest story of the week, easily, Elon Musk's $43 billion takeover of Twitter, and it prompted an op-ed in the Globe and Mail. You and your colleague at McGill University, Taylor Owen, ask or wonder, whose speech will Elon Musk's Twitter be protecting exactly? What prompted this one, Supriya? Is that kind of where your thoughts immediately went, was the big free speech promises he's been making?
Yeah, and it's really interesting how we talk about not just Twitter or Musk or any of this, but how we talk about platform governance to begin with. So just slight clarification, Taylor Owen is actually my boss, a colleague, yeah, but also
sure.
But just, he was approached by the Globe and Mail, and then we were like, okay, let's write something because this is an interesting topic. It's in the news, and, there's a large amount of expertise that we have at the center. So we figured it was a good sort of place to start. And I think the first thing that we need to understand here is that the way Musk and others describe free speech isn't really accurate, right? And there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of what free speech even is. Of course, everybody has the right to say offensive things, but you don't have the right to have that speech then be amplified by a private platform. And the other mistake that we make is that when we're talking about these platforms like Twitter or Facebook, we equate them with being the internet, but those aren't the same things. And so you of course have the right to say whatever you want, but you don't have the right to have your speech go viral or to have your speech be amplified or to target your speech specifically at those that are most vulnerable. And, Twitter and Facebook and all sorts of other social media platforms clearly realize this, which is why, they've been putting up guardrails for the last little bit in terms of how to better deal with this. And the other thing I would say is that, Musk has come out as this huge sort of critic when it comes to content moderation generally, right? But content moderation doesn't limit speech. It just ensures more people have a voice. When people leave Twitter because they're being relentlessly harassed or they're being relentlessly targeted, that's worse for our discourse. These seem obvious to me, and I'm not sure why that gets lost in some of this conversation.
Yeah, well, I want to read from your piece because this was one of the lines that I kind of jumped out at me. You said sensible rules about what can and can't be said on social media platforms don't limit speech. They ensure that everyone has a voice. Toxic online content doesn't maximize speech. It actually limits our collective discourse by shutting out the voices of those who are targeted. And it can be interesting, I think, to compare Twitter as it is now, or as it might be, or even as it was back in the day, to other platforms for so-called free speech, right? Like Trump's new platform, and maybe reference Parler all the time, and Truth and that kind of stuff. It's sort of, I guess, ultimately, it's just going to take time to. I don't know if you saw your follower count drop. I saw a lot of people talking about how they saw a noticeable drop, and now whether or not that's bots being eliminated and wiped out, or whether or not that's people actually leaving Twitter. I'm not sure anybody actually knows. We've reached out to a guy to get some insight on that for next week, Chris Boosie. But we'll see. I mean, ultimately, 6 months from now, you wonder what the landscape might look like after there's been some time to establish what Musk's leadership, what sort of a stamp he might put on it.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting because, at least anecdotally, that does seem to be the case, right? A lot of people are reporting follower drops, and there have been at least a few folks that were previously banned from Twitter or previously clicked off the platform that have now reactivated their accounts. And it's just one of these things where Twitter does seem, I think they put out a statement to NBC or something and said that a lot of this was organic activity. But who knows? It'll be interesting to see what happens to the platform, or even, to be honest, if this even really goes through. There are a couple of very smart folks out there who still seem somewhat doubtful that the deal will in fact fully close and that Musk will, end up being the owner of Twitter. So all of that also remains to be seen and worth keeping in mind. But I think just going forward, there's an interesting conversation to be had about who gets to regulate these platforms, and should we leave these solely to the interest, basically, of billionaires, right? Or to the private interests of the market. And I think if we approached some of this in a more holistic manner, in which we recognize that digital communication infrastructure is in fact integral to the way we operate nowadays, then they should probably be governed by us through our democracies and not necessarily solely through private interests. And if you look at the way we've allowed these platforms to sort of proliferate and to dominate the way we communicate with one another, democratic platform regulation can actually maximize speech in a number of ways that the market is unable to. And one way that is an obvious way is if we had real interoperability rules where you could take your data and your social connections from one social media platform to another. You're fostering much more healthy competition in the platform space to begin with. But we don't have that because all of our data belongs to the platforms, and we're effectively locked in to the platforms in which our data belongs. And that's kind of shitty, because if you wanted to leave Twitter or Facebook or insert your platform here, you can't, because all of your stuff is there. And then what do? You want to start anew every single time? That's tough.
Yesterday, this story caught my attention right out of the gates. Canadian Blood Services announces that by the end of September, it's going to end the blood ban that's been in place in Canada for decades for men who have sex with men. And I saw the headline and I went, wow, this is a huge story. And then you start to read the details of it. And per usual, when you're getting set to donate blood, you'll fill out a questionnaire, and it will ask if you've had multiple sexual partners over the past 3 months. And if you answer yes, it will ask if you've had anal or vaginal sex. And if you've had anal sex, you won't be able to donate blood, just like before. And I'm sitting there paying attention to the details and trying to sort this out, going, so really, what's the difference? I mean, unless you're a celibate man who has sex with men, or a celibate gay man, or what have you, the rules are the same. Nothing's changed. Is it still a significant story?
I mean, this is the problem when people just read the headline, right? And they don't read past the second or third graph, because that is how this is being framed, as the ban has been lifted. And, to be fair, I suppose the ban now applies equally to all people who have engaged in anal sex in the last 3 months, and it's no longer unique to gay men. But as you pointed out, the ban is still very much there. And the other thing that I think is interesting in all of this that has been sort of left out in the broader media conversation is that if you're a gay man who is taking PrEP drugs, or these pre-exposure prophylaxis drugs, that you take to, limit your HIV exposure, you're also ineligible. And those are becoming increasingly used. And so even if you haven't had anal sex in the last 3 months, if you've taken a PrEP type drug, you're also ineligible. And I'm not sure why that isn't in some of the broader coverage of this, because folks need to know. But I think all of this is it's obviously unfortunate. The Canadian Blood Services haven't done the best job in terms of communicating why they have the ban in place or why they need it or why they've done these things. And it's just in line with a lot of the shitty comms that they have, for a bunch of other things. And let me just give you one example. I don't know when you were on the radio, Ryan, if you had regular Canadian Blood Services spots, but in Toronto, we definitely did. And one of the regular spots that they would have is that they were in dire need of O negative blood. And the appeal was to folks that had O negative blood because they were universal donors and they were trying to appeal to their general goodness, that their blood was in high demand and it was needed. But if you have O negative blood, that means you can only receive O negative blood. So the better comms play here is to let people know with O negative blood that the supply is low. And if they end up in the hospital, they're going to need O neg blood. So they should probably better go out and donate. And yet you had this ass backwards way of communicating it. And so it just seems totally in line with the way that Canadian Blood Services tends to do a lot of their public facing comms. And it's unfortunate.
I want to let our audience know that we'll be tackling this story next week, early next week as well, and broadening the conversation. So we welcome your comments. I'm most interested, as always, in hearing from people that are affected by these policies, that have been affected by these policies. And, of course, we'll seek to speak with people that have been advocating for changes to these policies, of course, for the past number of weeks and months. Your home turf in Ontario getting set for an election, and Premier Doug Ford, obviously seeking re-election, had campaigned for a long time and become premier on talking about lean government and balancing budgets. And speaking of just reading the headlines, I'm a little bit guilty of that here. But if you read the headlines on the budget he's putting in front of Ontarians, it's lots of infrastructure spending and running deficits. What does that say to you about what this election campaign is going to look like?
I mean, I think basically the playbook that was pre-pandemic has been thrown out, right? And so it's worth noting that in 2018, the Ford government was very much running on hey, these liberal chuckleheads have been wasting your money and they're spending too much and you need us to rein in spending and to figure out Ontario's books. And that's gone out the window. And, to a degree that's understandable. Obviously, the pandemic has changed things. It's really exposed just how shitty our public healthcare system is in terms of being able to handle any degree of increase of people. And prior to the pandemic, it was already pretty crappy. So, there's lots of blame to go around there. But I think the problem going forward is for Ontario is we've kind of accepted a really low bar with Doug Ford and his government in managing the pandemic. And a lot of that is the fault of Jason Kenney and Scott Moe, because honestly, when you're comparing Ford to Kenney and Moe, then yeah, Ontario looks pretty good. But if you compare our response to Nova Scotia, then yeah, we're not as good as we could be. And I think we need to start demanding a little bit better from our leaders in terms of how our healthcare system can really look like. But I don't know if we're going to have a serious conversation about that, because in the federal election, we certainly didn't. And it seemed like to be business as usual.
We're earlier this week reading a post from an Edmonton city councillor by the name of Andrew Knack, who was he wrote it at 12:30 in the morning. I was kind of envisioning him tossing and turning and, awake, staring at the ceiling about COVID response. And he's just wrestling with the fact that he sort of feels like everybody's just moved on. And Alberta's numbers this week, considering it's a province with about 4.5 million people, rather modest population compared to Ontario, the numbers are still significant. Supriya, Alberta averaging last week 9 COVID deaths a day, 63 COVID deaths through the course of 1 week, including two people in their 30s. And it's been interesting to see with regards to, even in this context here, talking about, and we could be talking about economic recovery from COVID, or we could be talking about sort of the structural observations that people were able to make, leadership implications of COVID management and all those types of things. But do you think, if the psyche of, the average Canadian, or at least some Canadians, is to have moved on, so to speak, can you still see COVID being a big election factor?
No, probably not. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And it's because a lot of it is psychological, but most of it has been coming from our governments in terms of signaling that the pandemic is over. But you're right, in terms of our numbers, like our healthcare workers are still strained, right? There are still huge staffing issues, not just in Alberta, as I would presume would be the case, but in Ontario as well. Like surgeries and procedures are being postponed, and we've just accepted an incredibly high burden of infection. And what's really messed up about all of this, of course, is that we are allowing infections to happen at such a rate without having any real knowledge of what this virus is going to do to us down the line. And the more information we get, the scarier it is in terms of what this virus can do. We have a host of knowledge from all sorts of other viruses that have, long-lasting damaging effects. And I'm really not sure why we've decided to just throw in the towel without putting in investments like helping to clean our air, right? Like this would be a very good thing if in every public place, all of a sudden, we started investing in, filtration that would clean the air for us so that infections would be a lot lower, or your risk would be a lot lower in some of these indoor places. But we're not doing that. We've just sort of like thrown in the towel and been like, well, let's just accept it. But how are we going to accept it down the line if, 10, 15, 20% of the people who have been infected end up having serious long-term effects? And what is that going to do to our healthcare system?
I'm going to be talking to Jean Charest in about 12 minutes from now, I guess, maybe less than that. We'll see. He's just released his campaign, has his environment and clean growth plan, and essentially his climate plan. And probably the most notable element of it is dropping the consumer price on carbon. There are other elements. He says he'll repeal bills C-69 and C-48. That's the one that conservatives have been calling the No More Pipelines bill, and that's the tanker ban too. So we'll ask him about that. He's talking about national infrastructure corridors, which other conservative leadership hopefuls in races past have talked about. And he's also, I'm interested in this one, we'll ask him about this one, has talked about a Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, which would make it a criminal offense to interfere with the construction of pipelines. That's the type of talk that energy industry supporters love to hear, right? And that can resonate with the base for sure. But the real question is, Supriya, does the climate plan go far enough to remain credible in front of a general electorate? Not to win the leadership, but to win an election. Do you think dropping the consumer price on carbon, which most experts say is pretty integral to a credible plan, do you think that it negates the impact of his plan, or do you think that this one could be something?
No, I mean, it's not going to be enough for a general electorate. And I think increasingly the conservative out of touch with the general electorate on climate. And it's all well and good to be talking about how you're going to drop this or you're going to drop that and you're going to increase pipelines here and there. And I understand for the energy industry why you'd want a bunch of folks talking in that way. But the reality is that climate change is already here. We're already feeling the effects. People are already dying because of it in this country. And it's only going to get worse. And we were just talking about the pandemic. And I don't understand how we're not really having a national conversation, either in the conservative leadership race or, in the Ontario election that's happening, or, pick your whatever moment here. But we're not talking about the intersection of climate change and pandemics, because we know that climate change will increase the risk of these zoonotic spillovers and our chance of getting into a pandemic-like situation again. And there's very recent research to confirm that, and basically says it's way worse than we had even ever really thought. And yet here we are still, grappling with consumer price on carbon instead of really talking about how we're going to, adjust to the unfortunate reality of warmer climates, wetter climates, as well as, an environment in which we are inundated with more and more viruses that can harm us.
Yeah, well, let me tee this up for you. Right before we talked live, you sent me a quick text. This piece in The Atlantic by Ed Yong, I know, caught your attention, and I appreciated you got it to me in just enough time that I could read it. And it's fascinating. It's also alarming. We created the pandemicine by completely rewiring the network of animal viruses. Climate change is creating a new age of infectious dangers. For those in the audience hearing this or seeing this for the first time that haven't yet read the piece by Ed Yong at theatlantic.com, What especially caught your eye about the piece itself?
Okay. I mean, the general dreary, like doomsdayness of it.
Exactly.
I suppose,
Aside
right?
from the apocalyptic tone of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, aside from that, it's just that a lot of, I think what was initially posited was that we'd be looking at some of this into the future. So like 10, 20 years from now. But the reality is because of the degree to which the earth has already warmed, so much of what is happening is already because of climate change. And, the researchers were very careful to say that, they can't say with any degree of certainty that this pandemic was caused by climate change, but you're just increasing the likelihood of these events happening with a warming climate. And it's really interesting because, The Atlantic is obviously an American publication. These were American researchers that have come out with this, but the States is basically acting as though the pandemic is over and like, okay, that's it. Let's just forget about it. But I mean, we're really going to have to grapple with this and figure out how to strengthen public healthcare, how to strengthen our healthcare systems more generally, and how to respond to these sorts of events that will become increasingly likely. And that's not to mention the other sorts of infectious diseases that will become increasingly likely, like West Nile virus or dengue fever, for example, with the increase of mosquitoes in environments where we wouldn't necessarily have seen a bunch of mosquitoes before, right? So I don't know, it's kind of like I'm taking crazy pills and everyone else is just not in on the same sort of information, even though the information is available to everyone. It's like we're all just ignoring it.
Yeah, well, and when you start reading about how there could be implications with regards to where bats are migrating or the habitat around bats, and then these new realities around Ebola and the spread of Ebola, and like there's absolutely no. If you start talking about Ebola in the context of climate policy, then maybe people would take it more seriously. Or maybe people just still like Ebola, feel like Ebola is something that happens far, far away, but never where they live too.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, when the pandemic first started, I remember there were a few very smart people who were like, listen, now we have to talk about the intersection of pandemics and climate change. And they were basically drowned out by a chorus of pundits that were like, no, we can't just make this everything about climate. But it's like, well, please take a 101 class and figure out that they do very much intersect. And if you don't think they intersect, or you're trying to tell, a general audience that they don't intersect, then you don't have any business being with a public platform or being media facing, because you're just like spewing more bullshit into the airwaves that we don't necessarily need. Like, we do have to figure this out. And I'm not sure how we're going to do that if you have one entire side of the political establishment that refuses to even grapple with the notion that this is a reality. And then the other political side, which, isn't coming up with better concrete solutions or answers in order to actually grapple with this either. It's like we're all just sort of twiddling our thumbs and are waiting for the bad stuff to happen without prepping people on how to go about dealing with it once it gets here.
Should I have opened with
I know we're so down. I'm such a downer today.
No, and I was just about to be more of a downer. I didn't, but I was going to ask if I should have opened with like a sort of a condolences type vibe. I don't know how big of a Raps fan you are. Last night, I know that after they went down 3-0 to the Sixers and then came back and won a couple in a row, and everybody kind of wondered if they could pull it off, as unlikely as it might have been. But that wasn't the deal last night. I think they got spanked by about 40 points. Did you feel it, like the loss itself? Are you big Raps? I know the people around you, at least, probably. You're right in the heart of it all.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I actually... I woke up to the end of the fourth quarter, looked at the score. Like, I fell asleep on the couch. My husband was watching the whole time, so at least I didn't see it happen.
Yeah.
But like, whatever. This is a great team. I tweeted last night. I retweeted a tweet where a bunch of the fans that were in Jurassic Park were like booing the fans that were like leaving the stadium as they were, with minutes left. And it's just, you got to have hope for next season, believe in them, and they're young, they're good. There's a few changes that need to be made, clearly, but I mean, it's so hard not to get excited about this team.
They're a fun team to watch.
Yeah.
And just a couple years removed from a championship, so no No big
Hey,
deal.
man, it's
No
not
big
like the
deal.
Habs who went from Stanley Cup final to
final.
last place. Right?
Oh my
So,
gosh,
like,
I know. Are you're? I mean, you're born and raised Montrealer, so you got to be a Habs fan, and you can't be like a Habs and a Leafs fan, really. Although
Yeah,
I'm a
Habs fan.
born and raised Flames fan that worked for the Oilers for 7 years, so I guess anything's possible. But
Ouch.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The Leafs a good team, but they're running into an even better team. So we'll see what happens in the first round. It's always so good to see your face. Have an amazing weekend. Thanks for making time for us, Supriya.
you too, Ryan. Talk soon.
Yeah, you got it. You can catch Supriya Dwivedi every Friday here on Real Talk at 8:40 Mountain Time. That's 10:40 Eastern, or as we say, live or later on our YouTube and
I like
podcast
that.
archives. And, of course, I would imagine that Andrew Walker's got some more rap stock coming up
Today on The
later
Hedge.
today
Yeah.
on The Hedge. You can subscribe to The Hedge. Andrew Walker, anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. What a big first week for him.
Huge.
And for you producing the show. Been doing an amazing job.
I'm loving it.
How about those Leafs, man? The Leafs are going to run into the Tampa Bay Lightning, right? That's the collision course that they're on.
We're talking like it's bad for them, but that's going to be an incredible series. All the matchups are they're going to be epic this year. And the fans are all back in the stands. It's just we're revved up to go. So this is going to be good.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually is it actually confirmed yet? I'm not really sure, but we'll see. The Toronto Maple Leafs, of course, everybody had Austin Matthews with his 60 goals, and everybody's wondering if he's going to win the Hart Trophy. And then here in the Western Conference, some interesting things going on too.
Yeah.
Like, Nashville, everybody was, Calgary, is Calgary going to be able to get through Nashville because Calgary's looking really good? Mm-hmm. And then Saros, Nashville's goalie, gets hurt. And that changes the game there. And then you've got the Oilers and the LA Kings without Drew Doughty. And so everybody says, well, here's the Oilers' chance to punch their ticket to the second round for just the second time in Connor McDavid's career in the NHL. So
And then what, Flames and Oilers in the second? Oh, my gosh.
Baby.
We're going to burn this sucker to the ground.
It's going to be unbelievable. You can send us your hot sports takes anytime. To talk at RyanJesperson.com. Coming up in, Haas says nobody expected the Raps to even make the playoffs this year, so really it was a successful season. Mm-hmm. And they ran into a really good team, so, what are you going to do? Except for try again next year. That's always tough for fans to swallow, but, This is interesting from Bruce, who's tuned in live. We're talking about that piece in The Atlantic. It really is a fascinating one, and sort of the story around how climate change fits into, humankind on planet Earth, all the other animals that we live with too, and
really interesting.
and it's kind of like Supriya said, it's a little apocalyptic, and it's probably a bit of a wake up call that most of us could use. Bruce says, I teach bear and wildlife awareness. More and more of what I teach is about hybrid species spread and animal insect vectored diseases. He said it's here. Just no one wants to hear about it. That from Bruce, and I'm writing down Bruce's name because I'm going to track him down online and ask him to come on the show. Bruce, you can send us an email. How about to talk at RyanJesperson.com. I'd be fascinated to pick your brain, my man. Let me read from this piece for a second. Like, for the world's viruses, this is in theatlantic.com, Ed Young. I'll just read a little piece of it. He says it's a time of unprecedented opportunity for the world's viruses. That's not what you want to hear. An estimated 40,000 viruses lurk in the bodies of mammals, of which a quarter could conceivably infect humans. Most do not because they have few chances to leap into our bodies, but those chances are growing. Earth's changing climate is forcing animals to relocate to new habitats in a bid to track their preferred environmental conditions. Species that have never coexisted will become neighbors, creating thousands of infectious meet cutes in which viruses can spill over into unfamiliar hosts and eventually into us. Mm-hmm. Many scientists have argued that climate change will make pandemics more likely, but a groundbreaking new analysis shows that this worrying future is already here and will be difficult to address. So that's the piece in The Atlantic. You can read it at theatlantic.com. Ed Young is the author of that. Jean Charest in just a moment coming up on the show. Right now, I want to remind you that coming up on Sunday is May 1st, which means 15% off all grocery purchases, $75 or more at Friesen Brothers across the province. That's the first of every month at all 16 locations across Alberta. Friesen Brothers wants to remind you as well, we're heading into barbecue. No, we're already in barbecue season, and it's a great time to check out their custom Friesen Brothers barbecue sauce. It could be the world's best, including original honey garlic chicken and rib, and hickory. You can find them all at the Friesen Brothers across Alberta for more than 65 years. Alberta grown and Alberta owned. What are you? Are you like a honey garlic guy, chicken and rib guy, original?
I do like a teriyaki and honey garlic,
teriyaki.
that kind of area of the spectrum.
There you go. On your grilled zucchini, maybe?
Oh, love
Hey, grilled corn on the cob.
Amazing.
Now we're talking. Athabasca University is Canada's online university with accredited world-class online programs and courses that offer, most importantly, above anything else, flexibility to learn at your own pace on a schedule that suits your lifestyle. You can browse programs and courses today at athabascau.ca. You just punch in the code words. You use their very easy drop-down menus. Before you know it, you've got dozens and dozens of options, some of them micro courses, some of them full programs. It's a great time to reinvent yourself. Prepare yourself for a new job market with Athabasca University. And our friends at Eden Landscaping want to remind you that they've got more than 20 years of on-the-ground experience in Edmonton and area, bringing outdoor spaces to life. Just go to landscapeedmonton.ca and click on their portfolio. That's where you'll be able to view some of the beautiful things that they've done, including an ultra-modern installation, a natural beauty installation that works with the shape of the land, some nice, big, beautiful rock features there, and then the stunning fitted stonework that a lot of people are loving these days. Plus, they have the front yard these butterfly programs, Johnny. I love these ones with like the native grasses and the plants. They help the pollinators. They're on top of it all. Very trend forward at Eden Landscaping. You'll find them online at landscapeedmonton.ca. Hanging tight to talk to Jean Charest in just a second. Are we chatting with his team at this moment? Where are we
so
at
his reps are here. We're just waiting for Mr.
Okay, good
Charest.
stuff. So he's coming up in just a second. We've got a lot of questions for him that have been submitted by you, and we really appreciate that. You know, you can follow the show at Real Talk RJ on Twitter, and we always want to make sure that the questions that you're hearing from newsmakers, right, and in particular in this type of circumstance where it's somebody that wants to be the leader of a major political party in Canada, people are curious to know, what's it going to look like under your leadership? What are your priorities? How will you answer this or that? How will you manage this important file? Or how will you manage this delicate situation? Some of the questions that you've asked us have been interesting to see where your priorities are at. Like Laura, for example, wants us to ask, what will he do, or will he support a change to proportional representation? Laura's priority is what she describes as a more workable parliament. That's a really interesting question. Dave wants us to ask about guns. Yuri's curious to know for Mr. Charest's thoughts on potential decriminalization of drugs other than cannabis. That's a great question. Brock wants to know if he supports carbon pricing and the carbon tax. Now, Brock submitted that question yesterday. We're certainly going to ask Jean Charest about his environment and clean growth plan that would drop a consumer price on carbon. And Brock also wonders, when will he start heavy campaigning to counter Pierre Poilievre's rhetoric and what Brock describes as divisive messaging to Canadians? Meg is certainly not alone. She wants us to ask about whether or not Jean will repeal the $10 a day daycare that Megan says we all worked so hard for. Riley wants to know Mr. Charest's position on abortion. Shania is wondering about the 94 calls to action as a result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report being released to Canadians. That's a great question. Flinters wants to know about the solution to the housing crisis, right? Lucy, climate change. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that really gives us a good sense of where people are at, and we appreciate you taking the time to send in those questions as well. We're also taking your emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com, and that includes emails that are submitted for Trash Talk. That's coming up a little bit later on in the show today. And of course, this is a great way for you to also remind us the type of stuff you'd like to have on the show, the types of subjects that you'd like us to take on and cover. And that includes that blood ban. We've heard from a couple of you already, the blood ban being lifted. The tone of the emails that we've received thus far, I have to say, have been optimistic, but demanding more. So that's the tone I would describe of the emails we've seen to this point. Where do you land on it? The ban on individuals that would have participated in anal sex remains. So has the discriminatory policy really been lifted? You can let us know what you think. And as mentioned, on Monday, we'll take on that story, that developing story that was announced yesterday afternoon by Canadian Blood Services. Our next guest has been the Premier of Quebec. He's been the leader of the Progressive Conservatives. He's been the federal environment minister, and he wants to lead the Conservative Party of Canada into the next federal election. He's on the campaign trail across the country right now. In particular, right now, speaking to those living in prairie provinces, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Jean Charest. Good morning to you, and thanks for making time for us today.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It's a real pleasure to join you. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. How does campaign strategy, or how does the tone of the campaign change if you're in Quebec or the Maritimes or out here in the prairies?
Well, it's a very different campaign depending, I guess, on where you are. But Ryan, it's interesting because I find the media have difficulty reading the campaign of what it is. This is a campaign where the members vote. Right now, we're all in the process of recruiting new members, and we have until the 3rd of June to do that. And all those who are members as of that date will be eligible to vote during the summer. Then it's a preferential ballot done by a mail-in ballot. You choose your first, second, third choice, and it's 100 points per riding. So, it's the mechanics of it aren't easy to grasp for the public in general. But I feel very good about the campaign. The other thing I noticed, you'll notice the people who are the most covered, or let's call them the front runners, are running very different campaigns. All four of them, very, very different campaigns. And there's probably good reasons behind that. But I feel very good about my campaign. I just came off the road of 10 days in Ontario, and I was in New Brunswick and PEI over the last few days, and I had a very good run. So I'm feeling very good about my campaign.
It's interesting for you to kind of remind everybody as you're talking to us about how it works and how it plays out. And your goal right now is to be selling memberships, and there'll be mail-in ballots. And here's how it stacks up, geographically or within the different jurisdictions across the country. And it feels like you're speaking directly to the so-called front runner who's drawing all the big crowds in Alberta right now, who's making all the noise, who's getting all the attention on social media, Pierre Poilievre. And a lot of people, national commentators, as if I need to tell you, have been wondering, well, where's the inspiration of the Charest campaign? Some strategists have said he shouldn't even be trying to participate in the rally game if he can't pack the house with more than Pierre can. So how do you process that kind of stuff? And what would you like to say to those critics?
Beware of the shiny objects, Ryan. Beware of shiny objects. And, Bernier also had big crowds. Last time I looked, Bernier wasn't sitting in the House of Commons. The other thing to keep in mind, Ryan, is that, the front runners in the last two campaigns lost. And you can see why that happens, because the logic of first, second, third choice means that if you're the front runner, you top out after the first ballot. And then the logic of the vote flows in another direction. And so and by the way, Ryan, I'm the underdog in this race. I have no problem with that. I've been an underdog all my life. I'm very comfortable being the underdog. It works for me. I joke with the media. I always remind them, I'm not good at winning polls. I don't win polls. I win election campaigns. That's what I'm good at. And that's what I'll do for this party if I become the leader.
Well, is it fair to say that underdogs have won the last two Conservative leadership races?
Yeah,
Andrew Scheer was the underdog, and I think Aaron O'Toole was the underdog if you consider Peter MacKay to be the front runner in the last one. So if history is kind to you, it could be 3 for the last 3. Bradley's watching us live right now. He says, the problem with Conservative leadership races is you need to be right-wing to get the leadership, and then you need to swing center to get public support to become prime minister. And I think there's a certain truth to that. So how do you navigate that?
I navigate it by being who I am, and I'm a conservative. And then there are lessons that, your listener is putting his finger on something. There's a lesson drawn from the last race, because Aaron O'Toole made an effort to reach out, let's call it on the right. And then when he was a chosen leader, tried to recenter. I'm not going there in the sense that what I am offering is who I am, my track record, and what I've done. And I'm a conservative who believes in conservative values, and I practice them. And that includes fiscal conservatism. And I'll give you a real-time example. When this government now in Quebec, Legault, came into power 3 years ago after 15 years of a Liberal government, which is a coalition Liberal government of federalists, by the way, like BC, for those who say, well, he's a Liberal. He inherited, Ryan, an $8 billion surplus, a higher credit rating in Quebec than Ontario. And that's after 15 years of discipline. That is real fiscal conservatism. It's not a speech or a slogan. It's actually an outcome. and over time. I believe in a market-based economy. I believe in families, all sorts of families, and the support that they need to be able to thrive and be the cornerstone of our society. I believe in law and order and respecting the rule of law. I believe in Canadian conservative federalism, which has always worked very well for the country. When we've had national conservative governments, big things get done. And I've had enough, like other conservatives, of losing. Have you had enough of losing in 15, 19, and 21? And if the answer is yes, well, I want to be a leader who's going to unite the party and deliver a national government. That's where I'm at.
To be fair, the previous conservative government had a tough time getting big pipeline projects built, and the promises that you're making, when it comes to your energy policy, that's essentially the center message of it. And I want to talk about dropping the consumer carbon tax because that's the one that's getting people's attention. But the Environment and Clean Growth Plan that you've dropped talks about repealing bills C-48 and C-69, colloquially the tanker ban and the No New Pipelines Act. That's what conservatives have been calling it. Yeah. And you also talk, which is interesting, and it'll get people's attention, about the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. In other words, it would make it a criminal offense to interfere with the construction of a pipeline. Now, of course, you're touching on this, that this also relates to reconciliation and Indigenous relations across Canada, and a lot of the opposition of pipelines, most especially on the West Coast, have involved Indigenous or First Nation communities that have said they don't want these running through their backyards. And we've seen it with the construction of the LNG pipelines. We've seen it with controversy around Northern Gateway and even TMX. So how do you find that balance? How do you be a leader that comes to the table and says, I take reconciliation and Indigenous consultation seriously. We need this to be able to pass through the courts, like former Prime Minister Harper was unable to accomplish. But at the same time, we're going to be very pro-energy on this, and we're going to be steadfast in that commitment.
You need a very clear position to start with. I am pro-resources for this country. I did a plan called Plan All for Northern Quebec for the mining sector, but I'm pro-oil and gas. I'm pro-pipelines. By the way, what I'm saying to you here today, Ryan, I say in Quebec. And so I'm not giving you a different version of what my policies are depending on where I am. And in Quebec, admittedly, it's a tougher sale. It is, I know. But I was when I was premier and after when I left office. But I also think recent events point to a different way of looking at these projects. There's a new light. This war in Ukraine has really shed light on two critical issues. One, the issue of security of supply for our country, which is an issue of sovereignty, which we can't take for granted. The second one is, had we had our act together, we could be a supplier of clean, ethical energy to Europe, who are in this cruel situation of buying oil and gas and indirectly funding Russia to invade Ukraine. Isn't that a reason to look at what we're doing now and ask ourselves, did we make the right decisions in the past? Can we do better in the future? Now, I want to be clear on one thing, Ryan. No one can impose this on the provinces. We can't just barge in and say, we're going to impose this on you. And now, by the way, Albertans wouldn't want that, because Albertans in Quebec on this stuff, they think the same way. They want to run their own shop, and they're right to. But you need a prime minister who has a clear determination to do it. And I'll give you another example that may sound insignificant or a detail. It ain't. Did you ever hear Mr. Trudeau get up and say, I'm in favor of Energy East? There's no big projects that get done unless there's leadership. I know, I've been there. Unless someone stands up and says, let's do it. It would have been perfectly fine for the prime minister to say, I'm in favor of Energy East. We should get it done, and we'll get the environmental assessment right, and we'll deal with all these issues. But he never did that. And if you don't have that kind of leadership, well, then none of these big projects get done. Now, I'm losing your question here on infrastructure that I want to address, because yes, I do think we need to change the law and be very firm in one clear lesson that we've learned. When it comes to critical infrastructure that is key to making this economy work, we have to be very clear with every Canadian that no one has the ability to go out there and break the law or support those who break the law and says, I'm doing this because it's popular. And it's not a matter, and yes, we can be very clear on that with First Nations and Indigenous Canadians, while at the same time working with them. And in my plan, what I included, by the way, is something that is inspired by Alberta. In Alberta, you've put together a corporation to allow Indigenous communities to participate in the equity of these projects, well, I would do the same thing. I'd steal that page out of Alberta's book, which I think is a good idea, and I'd put it in the Canadian federal book and say, why don't we do this across the country? And that will help us get projects done.
What would you say to critics of yours who include political commentator Andrew Coyne talking about your plan earlier this week? He says, and yet another Conservative leadership candidate opts for a climate plan that will do less at a higher cost than just pricing carbon. A lot of the experts believe that for these plans to be credible and taken seriously, they have to include a consumer price on carbon. You don't believe so. You want to lift it. You'll see some support from consumers, that's for sure, people whose cost of living is rising. But how do you maintain credibility for the bigger plan?
I've been around this a long time. I led the Canada's delegation in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio that signed on to the Climate Change Convention. Canada was the first G7 country to do it. I've attended a lot of COP meetings, and I did something in Quebec that isn't a consumer tax. In Quebec, it's a carbon trading system with California. Now that's for Quebec, Ryan. That may not be for Alberta, it may not be for Ontario, but that's what our federal system's about, allowing the province to make the choice that suits its own purpose and reality, and it works in Quebec and people support it. It's not a consumer tax. And what Andrew Coyne, I'm sorry to say, is reporting is an old thing about how we deal with this issue. I'd like you, can you remember, Ryan, any government, provincially or federally, setting targets and actually meeting them? I mean, I don't think it's ever happened. And yet we go on publishing press releases. Press releases do not reduce carbon in the atmosphere. Can we all be clear on that? I'm being a little caricatural here. Press releases do not reduce carbon emissions. What they do is set another press release. I've set an objective that I think we can meet and maybe exceed. And if we're smart about it and get it done, and that means carbon capture and storage and hydrogen and biofuels, small modular reactors. We're not going to get to zero and in 2050 without nuclear, for example. And I'm clear on the objective. We all agree, industry, provinces, the world, that the objective is zero emissions in 2050. Let's be smart about getting there.
Meg's watching us live and wants me to ask if you will try to repeal the $10 a day daycare that Meg says we all worked so hard for. What's your plan there?
Meg, I will respect the agreements that were signed by the Kenney government or Scott Moe's government and the government of Doug Ford. Let me share a story with you. When I came to Quebec politics in 98 to lead this coalition of Federalists to fight back against Lucien Bouchard's proposal to hold a third referendum, I criticized the daycare system because I thought, as a conservative, I thought it was too expensive. You know what? I was wrong, and I admit I was wrong, and I took a political beating out of it, but that's not the point. I was wrong because if it's done right, what it does is a few things. First of all, it creates conditions by which a family can better choose to have children because the obstacle of daycare, its access and affordability, is much better at a reasonable price. And the second thing about it is that it allows women in particular to choose. It's a choice. No one's forcing them, but it allows them to choose to go in to the labor market and work and earn. And in Quebec, we went from the lowest level of participation rate of women in the labor market to among the highest in the world. And that means more money for the family if they choose, Ryan, to do so. The third thing is that it reduced poverty. And that's what we were very proud of. When I was premier, we reinstated family allowances that were non-taxable, weighed in favor of low-income families, and it had a real impact on reducing poverty in Quebec. So I would do more, but I'd go a step further. I would enhance the tax credit for families who do not use the government $10 system, because not everyone will want to use it or can. I'd enhance the tax credit. I would take federal taxes off the amount of money that parents receive when they're on parental leave. I would allow a parent on parental leave to earn up to $20,000 to reintegrate the labor market without being clawed back. And I would allow a mother who is pregnant in the third month to immediately have access to the child tax credit to better prepare for when that child will be born. So this isn't just, it's economic issues, it's reducing poverty, it's increasing the birth rate if we get it right. And there's limits to what we can do there, that's for sure. But those are all the things that make it work. So I would maintain them. And I'm the only candidate I know in this race who's actually saying I would do it. If anyone else is obfuscating about it, you should be suspicious of what their intentions are.
One of those running against you for leadership of the Conservative Party essentially brought coffee and donuts to the Ottawa occupiers for a series of weeks 2 months ago. This weekend, Canada's capital is bracing for hundreds of motorcycles and other vehicles. They're calling it the Rolling Thunder Convoy. If you were Prime Minister, what would your message be to the convoy participants this weekend?
That they have a perfect right to express themselves. And, coming out of COVID, this is our third year. People are tired, they're frustrated. Some of them are angry, and they have the perfect right to say so. And a leader and a prime minister should listen to them. This whole thing we had last winter was such a total mess. How could this happen? I mean, how could it be allowed to happen? And the first responsibility is with the prime minister, who actually fanned the flames by making disparaging remarks that were unhelpful, and then was missing in action. But I also, and the point I'm making here, Ryan, and I feel very strongly about, is that if you have the privilege of being a legislator, because it's a privilege, I'm making laws that I'm going to impose on you, for example, Ryan. That's what happens when you're a member of parliament. You say to Ryan, I'm going to make a law here, and you know what? You have to obey it, otherwise you're sanctioned. I can make law, change laws, but you don't have the privilege of actually being above the law or supporting those who break the law. That I feel very strongly about that, because that's a real test of leadership. And you know what? Sometimes it's more popular to do the reverse. And you have to have the ability to stand up for what's right. I did it on Bill 21 in Quebec. This bill that outlaws religious symbols. It was proposed to me as premier around 2008-09. And I said no. It would have been much more popular for me to adopt it. And because it's a popular bill now in Quebec, this new government brought in Bill 21, and I'm opposed to it. But back then I was asked to do it, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it because it's wrong. It's contrary to the Quebec Charter, contrary to the Canadian Charter. And if it goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, my government will speak to it. So that's where I am on this issue.
We've got a few more minutes with you, Mr. Charest. I want to fit in a couple of questions from audience members. Yuri notes that April 20th, so-called 420, was last week. He wants to know how you feel cannabis legalization has gone in Canada, and what are your thoughts on the potential decriminalization of other drugs?
Well, on cannabis, the jury's still out. I'm not sure that on the way that it's been deployed. I heard about it earlier this week I was out in New Brunswick, Ryan, from someone in the industry who's saying it wasn't going well, that the companies that were started are all in financial trouble. I'm not sure exactly on how. I'm not a big fan of encouraging the use of drugs. Obviously, no one is. I understand that, but we have it, so there it is. On decriminalizing other drugs, I think I'm skeptical also. I'll tell you what I'm skeptical about. And I'm not saying I won't listen to those who want to make that case. I just don't want the use of drugs, whether legal or illegal, by the way. Let's open the conversation much largely. And this includes alcohol and other. I just want us to encourage healthy lifestyles as much as possible. And rather than stigmatize folks with either legal or illegal or alcohol, just encourage people to stay away from as much of these drugs as possible in our lifetime. And that we should make that case very, very early on to young people, not stigmatize them and be, moralist, but just make the point that, listen, if you want to have a full life and you want to be happy and healthy, whether it's illegal or legal drugs, that's not the answer.
To be fair, though, that does sound a little bit like the just say no Nancy Reagan thing, which I don't know that it worked.
Well, I know, Ryan, I know. And I'm trying to be, and I was at one time Minister of Youth. I can tell you one thing: if you're out there telling young people don't do drugs, you're not going to connect with them. And parents have a very important role, by the way, in this respect. I don't know how many times we underestimate how important the voice of parents are in the life of their children. And it's about example. It's not about the words they choose. It's really about example. I just think everyone needs to be conscious of that. But I hear you. And I'm just not a fan of the use of drugs.
There's a lot of parents. You want to talk about parents. You want to talk about middle-class Canadians that are extremely concerned about inflation, about the rising cost of living, about what's happening in housing markets in the major urban centers and elsewhere. Flinters has submitted this question by way of our Twitter account, asking, what are your policy ideas to help address or solve the housing crisis across the country? How would you approach it as Prime Minister?
Well, Flinters, thank you for this is a big issue, by the way, Ryan. It's coming up everywhere, in every part of the country, with a different, variations on the theme, because it's not as strong a problem or a big a problem in certain parts as others. We need more houses. We need to encourage municipalities to build more rapidly, to do different formats. That'll include, triplex and quadruplex, but also co-op housing, intergenerational housing. We just need more houses. I mean, we need to do everything we can. And then we have to be careful on how we do this, because it's tempting to sort of say, well, let's give people more money so that they more rapidly, and young people so that they can buy, which is okay. But let's keep in mind that you may end up fanning the flames of inflation by actually injecting more money into so build is the answer. We need to build more rapidly and build everywhere to have a better market. On inflation, there's two things. We have to control spending. Spending feeds inflation, and we need to do that as rapidly as possible so that we're dealing with that. And the Bank of Canada has a role to play, obviously, in this regard. And they're the ones who control the monetary policy. They have a mandate to do that. So they're going to have a hard look at interest rates. And the problem we have in Canada, Ryan, which is very particular to Canada, is that household debt is very high in our country, higher than other countries and at record levels. The second thing is that the residential housing market's a huge chunk of our economy, bigger than it should be at 10% of GDP. We're vulnerable. The point I'm making is that we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable. And we have to be careful on how we administer our money here.
Canada's Conservatives will announce their new leader on September 10th. Will it be Mr. Jean Charest? We'll wait and see. Thanks for your availability today. We appreciate you taking these questions.
And Ryan, one last thing. If people want to support me, go to jeancharest.ca and do like Ryan, become a member and support Jean Charest. Oh, did I say that, Ryan? I'm sorry.
I wouldn't rule anything out, Mr. Charest. No. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. There you go. I've got to say he pronounced, this is going to be the most obvious thing I'm ever going to say. He pronounces his own name so beautifully.
I know.
And I just feel like such a hack as I'm thanking him for joining us. But you can see on his website there, that's it. They say join the team. And then they capitalize the whole thing that is built to win. That's the slogan, Jean Charest, built to win. You think he is? What do you make of what you just heard? You can send us your feedback anytime. Our inbox, obviously open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. talk@ryanjesperson.com. Thanks to everybody that submitted questions. We got to as many as we could. I appreciated Yuri's about decriminalizing all drugs, the harm reduction conversation in Canada. We've talked so much about COVID, and rightfully so. Obviously, I'm not saying we should not have been dedicating our efforts and our conversations to COVID, but there is another health crisis in the country, and that is death by drug poisoning and overdose and fentanyl. And I mean, obviously, we're losing hundreds, thousands of Canadians every single year. And for whatever reason, in particular, I mean, across the country, obviously, I'm not diminishing deaths anywhere else, but Alberta and BC have had a really horrible stretch. And that's why I think a lot of the conversations, viewers like Yuri want to know, what is this party, if he's leader, and ultimately if he's able to form government, what would that government do with regards to their approach on harm reduction? One great question. Cost of living, housing crisis, everything else. I didn't get to Jillian's question, which was...
I was waiting.
Because his team was, and we appreciate them making him available, and they're like, this is your last question.
Stayed longer than they had to.
Stayed a little bit longer than they had to, which was great. But Jillian had a great question, and she says, I'm considering buying a membership, but I want to know, what are you going to do to restore discipline to the party? She says, I wouldn't want to be embarrassed as a party member. How would you restore discipline?
I think all the parties need a little more discipline. Have you watched debating over the last few months in the House?
There's people
just people shouting over each other.
But some people really appreciate, and I'm not saying that that's the best part of politics, but some people appreciate the theatrics of it all.
It is, but I mean, you turn to the States and at least they let each other talk. Like, at least they let each other finish a sentence.
Yeah, I guess.
Some of the
maybe.
time. You know?
Sometimes.
And then they get on Twitter.
And all hell breaks loose. We were excited just a couple of days ago to announce to you that registration is now open for the inaugural Real Talk Golf Classic. It goes Thursday, June 23rd at 2 p.m. No, Johnny, I want this. I want that music bed because I'm gonna roll this right into Dairy Queen. All right, you watch how this is about to go. But the Real Talk Golf Classic, June 23rd, it's a 2 p.m. shotgun start out the Ranch Golf and Country Club. It's my home course. I absolutely love it there. It's going to be a day you will not want to miss, all in support of our Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. All proceeds from the tournament will be going to fund that scholarship that annually will award $5,000 to a post-secondary student that's lost a parent to cancer. You can go to ryanjesperson.com. You just click on the events link, and that's where you'll find the link to register for the golf tournament. It's nice and easy. Just runs through Eventbrite. And, of course, if you'd like to sponsor that tournament, maybe you want to volunteer in the tournament, you can send us an email, all inquiries, to golf@ryanjesperson.com.
I'm volunteering.
Yeah, you are.
I'll be spinning the
You'll be
tunes.
spinning tunes. And I'm setting it up. I'm not going to golf in the tournament.
Yeah.
I'm going to set up on a tee box. So everybody that comes through, we can hang out with them.
Nice.
And I'm going to make sure that you and I are hanging out in the same vicinity.
Awesome.
And I'm going to make sure that there's some sort of like a food resource near us.
I'll crank it.
Like a grill or something
Amazing.
And we'll just set up shop and people can roll through and maybe we'll hit their tee shots for them or something like that.
I'll crank a couple balls. You can see my horrible swipe.
Well, that's all right.
It goes to the left, so I have to.
Well, then you just got to
turn
aim to the right.
That's what I do.
We call that Thiessen golf in our friends. Our buddy Jeff Thiessen.
Yeah.
You know, you aim at 11 o'clock if you want it to wind up at 2 o'clock.
It gets where it's supposed
And
to.
then it's just like this big sort of like sweeping. It just goes across the whole fairway and lands. Now, you get screwed playing Thiessen golf when you actually hit a good straight shot aimed at 11 o'clock.
Right.
You just blast it into all the houses.
Works for me, though.
No houses on the ranch course, which is nice. You're not breaking any windows. We're going to set you up for success. June 23rd at the Real Talk Golf Classic. So I heard from Mark and Michelle, the owners of the Dairy Queens in Northwest Edmonton.
Yeah.
And, of course, they partner up with Michael Lieber, who owns the Dairy Queen in Sherwood Park and the Baseline Road. And they said, hey, you make sure you know. They said, we're in for the Real Talk Golf Classic.
Amazing.
They're going to be a whole sponsor. And they said, I don't know what this is. I don't know what these are. They said they're going to make dilly bar shooters.
Oh, my
Like, I don't know if those have booze in them.
And they've got the plant-based dilly bars at Dairy
They
Queen,
have
too.
the plant-based dilly
So
bars.
you and me will go shot for shot.
I just crushed a plant-based dilly bar just the other night. I kind of felt like I was eating health food in a way.
I think that's what it is, right?
It's kind of health food. It's healthier food, maybe. I don't know if it is or not, but it was good.
It was great.
Yeah, little Wyatt Rudy in our house. He's the one that's making the decisions on what we're going to pick up
crusher.
at Dairy Queen. And I said, what do you think about these ones? I said, there's no milk in these ones, right? They're dairy-free dilly bars. He's like, wow. He said, I think they're pretty. He's just got chocolate all over his face. He goes, I think they're pretty good, Dad.
Attaboy, Wyatt.
Attaboy, Wyatt Rudy. There you go. Our friends at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge are going to be busy this weekend. A lot of people coming in to check out that brand new Dodge Challenger. Absolutely beautiful. Ask him about the Hellcat. That's the one. If 600 horsepower is not enough, upgrade to the Hellcat at the Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge locations that have better selection on Ram 1500 trucks and Jeeps than anybody else in the province. And not just on the new vehicle front, they've also got a great pre-owned selection. If you'd rather stay home while you do your short listing, you can shop their inventories online. You'll find the links to Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge under the sponsors tab on our website at ryanjesperson.com. Well, every Friday we wrap up our week of shows with a cathartic exercise. Johnny puts on his 5-point seatbelt, turns it up to 10. As Terry and Diener would say, they turn down the suck. And thanks to our friends at Local Environmental, we present something called Trash Talk. And this one's a longer one from Lindsay. And so Lindsay owns Trash Talk this week. She says there's been a lot of Elon Musk Twitter talk on the show this week, and it got me thinking about the current state of social media and how it's changed life on planet Earth as we know it. We're more connected than ever, but we're also more alone than ever before. We're more up to date on world events, but we seem even further from our neighbors, including in other countries. We share more of our personal details in a way that's less personal than ever before. Lindsay needs to write a book. Says, as we take the good with the bad, there is a need for the platforms we all use, like Twitter, to be welcoming, to allow people to express free speech, but at the same time work to prevent harm. I'm not saying automatically that a billionaire owning a company is a bad thing, but if we allow the loudmouth, money-hungry space jockeys of the world to control the stream of our thoughts, feelings, and news, we're doomed. Is it not concerning to anybody else that this man tries to rile up his followers to attack people he doesn't agree with? Hey, can you load up that Elon Musk tweet that I sent you just the other day? I think I sent it to you yesterday, Johnny. Do we still have it? The 2 that he asked, where he said what he's going to do next, what he's going to buy next. You remember that tweet? He said, next up, I'm going to buy Coca-Cola to put the cocaine back in. Did you see that tweet from Elon Musk? He says, let's make Twitter maximum fun.
Last night he said he's going to fill up all the Doritos bags to the top.
I missed that one.
Yeah.
This guy just dropped 43 Bs on Twitter, and that's what he's doing with it. I don't know. Coca-Cola with the cocaine back in.
Change the font.
Yeah, Jack and Coke will never be the same. All right, back to Lindsay. Says, is it not concerning that he supports conspiracy theories and disagrees with COVID science? Is it not scary as hell that this man has been blowing cash on making sure that he can get off in space rather than making our lives here on the ground a better place? Thanks for the visual, Lindsay. I'm sorry, but a $60,000 electric vehicle is not the answer to global warming. A ticket to ride a rocket to Mars isn't going to solve the warming of the Earth, starvation, or make life better for the average family trying to make ends meet, like mine. Now, is it Elon's job to save the planet? No, but he sure has acted like a savior, so I'm holding his feet to the fire. I'll wait to see what changes he makes to a platform, in my opinion, that's already satisfactory for the most part. But if it's not making it safer for the users logged on every day, I'm out. Will my 500 followers miss me? Probably not. But I'll find a place where at least I know I can express myself without the fear of being attacked, threatened, or posting in fear. I'm all for opinions and free speech, but make it a place we feel invited to do so. If not, my Facebook, TikTok, and Insta will suffice. Do the right thing, Elon. All bolded up, Lindsay. Clean up the garbage on Twitter, and for the love of God, don't fill it with more ads, especially ones for penis pills, electric car joyride machines, and tickets on a rocket to see the stars. Good luck, Musk. I'll be watching closely. That from Lindsay. Nicely said, Linz. Coming up next week, as mentioned, we'll take a look at that blood ban being lifted by Canadian Blood Services. How legit is it, actually? Plus, epidemiologist Dr. Madhu Pai will join us Monday morning as we continue our coverage of COVID. Whether others are talking about it or not, we'll get you what you need to know. Send us an email anytime. Positive Reflections coming up Monday, too. Have a safe and wonderful weekend, Real Talkers. One love.